In Britain, Prime Minister Theresa May is now in the fight of her political life over her country's plan to leave the European Union, better known as Brexit.
Yeah, just one day after approving a temporary draft plan, some key ministers have resigned from May's government, and the clock is ticking down on the deadline for Britain's official departure. I24NEWS international affairs correspondent Bianca Zanini has the latest.
Theresa May did not have a very good day. The British Prime Minister came under severe pressure Thursday, fighting to defend a draft Brexit deal with the European Union.
Yes, difficult and sometimes uncomfortable decisions have had to be made. I understand fully that there are some who are unhappy with those compromises. But this deal delivers what people voted for, and it is in the national interest.
But the man who negotiated that deal resigned, and many other resignations followed.
Theresa May is certainly in serious trouble. There have been a couple of cabinet ministers who've resigned, and there are some other junior ministers as well. In addition to that, she's facing the prospect of a challenge to her continuing as Prime Minister.
Talks over a Brexit divorce deal have been going on for more than a year. On Tuesday, a draft agreement of 585 pages was finally ready. Now, it might all be ripped up. The British cabinet gave the deal its go-ahead late Wednesday. But that won't be enough. The deal will need approval by the British Parliament, which is divided into all sorts of camps, most of which oppose the deal.
Very, very surprised if looking forward that Labour MPs vote to support Theresa May, because they will be supporting her staying in power.
The confusion and lack of support for the deal weakens an already embattled Theresa May. With Parliament so divided over such an important issue, the entire government could fall.
You have streams of talent within the Conservative Party who would be very capable of leading a proper Brexit.
Chaos in British politics matter outside Britain. This is the world's fifth largest economy, one of the world's biggest military powers. The ripples of the Brexit chaos potentially reaching far. Bianca Zanini, I24NEWS.
To discuss, let's bring in UK and Europe correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, after those big resignations, Theresa May was in the House of Commons answering questions for 3 hours. Was she able to reassure Parliament about her Brexit deal draft despite the chaos unfolding in her own party?
I don't think she was, because what was most notable about that marathon 3-hour run in the Commons was that very few people actually spoke out or asked questions which defended her position with this draft deal, including those on the Conservative benches. There were one or two, but on the whole, people were questioning this draft plan that she has finally come to with the EU and which she managed to get cabinet approval for yesterday. But as you heard there in the report, not long after that cabinet approval, within hours, 2 major resignations from the cabinet, and including other ministers and junior ministers and a couple of parliamentary secretaries, there were 7 resignations in total since that cabinet approval, which of course is dreadful news for Theresa May. Worse news still is that what became clear in the House of Commons is that if this were put to a vote there, which it will be, she would not be able to carry this.
And what about her leadership itself of all those Conservatives? Did she manage to convince many of her own members of Parliament that she should stay as their leader, or is she about to get kicked out?
Again, it doesn't look promising for Theresa May. What needs to happen for there to be a vote of no confidence in her within her own party is that 48 letters need to be lodged with a committee of backbench Conservative MPs, and when there are 48 of them, that triggers a vote of confidence in her. Now, she may manage to win that vote of confidence because there's a very high threshold, but just triggering it, of course, is bad news for her leadership credentials. There are plenty of other people in the party who, in normal circumstances, would love to be leader and, of course, then take on the role of Prime Minister. But at the moment, the Brexit negotiations, especially with so little time left, are something of a poison chalice. So the question here really is, how much do other people not want the job? That might be Theresa May's saving grace.
So, Jonathan, what does it all mean for the Brexit itself? Are British people now more or less certain about what the Brexit deal will eventually look like?
I think we can safely say that British people are much less certain about what the deal will look like, which is strange because Theresa May has announced what she thinks the deal will look like and what she's agreed with the EU. But with no support for that in the Commons, people are asking exactly what might happen in the long run.
Jonathan Sacerdoti reporting from London. Jonathan, thank you.
Turning now to another country plagued with political shakeups, Israel. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman officially submitted his resignation in protest of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas. His resignation will take effect on Sunday.
I24NEWS senior defense correspondent Jonathan Regev takes a look at Lieberman's tenure in office.
For more than 2 years, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman seemed to be speaking the same language. There were no major clashes between these two old friends and political rivals until the situation on the Gaza border began to escalate. While Netanyahu pushed to contain the constant rounds of violence from Hamas, working to end them with fragile ceasefires, Lieberman thought this is the wrong approach.
We have to deal Hamas a heavy blow. This is the only way to restore the situation to what it was and reduce the level of violence to zero, or close to zero.
This was not the first time Lieberman found himself in front of an obstacle he could not overcome, the Netanyahu obstacle. In the 2015 elections, the main slogan for Lieberman's party was death sentence to terrorists. But 3.5 years later, the death sentence is nowhere to be seen. Lieberman not only wished to position himself as a right-wing leader, but also as the leader of Israel's secular citizens. As such, he opposed the exemption from mandatory military service handed out to the ultra-Orthodox population, but at the same time knew that as a member of a coalition which includes ultra-Orthodox parties, he needs to compromise. A new draft bill with compromises from both sides is set to be presented soon. Does Lieberman's sudden resignation mean his tenure at the Ministry of Defense was a failure? Clearly not. He worked hard to create good relations with the Chief of Staff, speed up IDF operations against the tunnels coming in from Gaza, and maintained a constant, mostly undercover war against the Iran-Hezbollah axis in Syria. But despite this, the public will mostly remember him for this comment made just weeks before walking into office.
If I am the Minister of Defense, I will give Mr. Hania 48 hours and tell him, either you give back the bodies of the soldiers and our citizens, or you die.
As it turned out, it was Lieberman who resigned less than 24 hours after the end of the latest round of violence between Israel and Hamas. With elections probably just around the corner, there will be plenty of explaining for him to do. Jonathan Regev, I24NEWS.
Meanwhile, Lieberman's resignation leaves the fate of Prime Minister Netanyahu's government in limbo.
Yeah, now Mr. Netanyahu is in a race to win over the hearts and minds of Israelis to hold on to his office. I24NEWS diplomatic correspondent Eli Hachenberg has that story.
It's money time. Snap elections or just early ones. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is mulling over how to salvage his right-wing government, and if not the government, then his right-wing image. Netanyahu spent his Thursday meeting with coalition party heads, weighing the options of keeping his shaky government in power. Most of them recommended elections now. But one important meeting will only take place Friday morning with hawkish Education Minister Naftali Bennett, who now wants to become Defense Minister in exchange for political stability. And yes, it's an ultimatum.
Yesterday, I met with the Prime Minister in order for him to give me the position of Defense Minister for one purpose only, that Israel will win again.
No less important, maybe even more so, is Netanyahu's meeting with the heads of southern communities. This in face of mounting discontent among the citizens in this area, most of whom traditionally vote for Netanyahu's Likud party.
Sderot is like Tel Aviv. The security of the residents of the south is just as important as the security of the rest of Israel. We are in the middle of a campaign. We need patience, coolness, and determination.
The ceasefire with Hamas is widely perceived as a loss for Israel, among Israelis, that is, especially right-wing voters, and someone will have to pay a political price. Netanyahu now wants to make sure before launching campaign season, he is not the one. Eli Hachenberg, I24NEWS.
So, Tal, do you think there will be snap elections early?
It could be if Netanyahu meets with Education Minister Bennett and he doesn't let him become the defense minister. Reports claim that around March, Israel could go to elections. And then what will happen, David? Netanyahu will get reelected and Lieberman will ask to go back to the defense minister position.
Right. And so interesting to see Netanyahu trying to shore up his political base with the meetings in the South right now. It's fascinating.
Right. And speaking of the South, the fighting this week between Israel and the Palestinians was the worst in more than 3 years.
In this week's Diplomatic Dispatch, correspondent Christian Millard takes a look at how Iran's influence in Hamas has been a major factor in this conflict.
The latest flare-up between Israel and Hamas has shown how swiftly the pendulum can swing from the brink of a truce to an all-out conflict. The hostilities this week was the worst outbreak of violence since Israel fought a 50-day war in Gaza in the summer 2014. Israel and Hamas have fought 3 wars in the last 10 years, with flare-ups becoming increasingly frequent in recent months as Hamas has urged Gazans to protest at the fence along the border with Israel. Since Hamas won Palestinian elections in 2006 and took over power in the Gaza Strip after ousting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who has opted for cohabitation with Israel, tension has grown all the more as Hamas said it would never recognize Israel's right to exist and would always advocate the use of violence against it. Today, in the face-off between Israel and Hamas, another regional actor is pulling the strings, Iran, which resumed its relationship with Hamas in 2017 and has been financing the terrorist organizations ever since. As Iran finances Hamas with rockets from Israel's west, it also funds terror from the north for potential attacks to be launched against Israel from Lebanon by Hezbollah. Iran, willing to extend its control over the Middle East, does not distinguish between USA, its Israeli and Arabic allies, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Egypt. Kenneth Timmerman, Trump's national security and foreign policy advisor during the presidential campaign, told me, Israel, who has the full support of the US, did he add, must respond firmly to Hamas. It's not surprising that in this context, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared, no political solution can be reached with Hamas and Iran.
David, to Millard's point, one would expect now that after U.S. sanctions went into effect in Iran with the oil sanctions, then that the regime would scrap some of its regional involvements also with Hamas, but it doesn't seem so.
Yeah, it seems like Iran can't resist meddling both with Hamas and, of course, Hezbollah to the north.
I don't care about what their people are saying. International pressure is growing to end the war in Yemen, and domestic pressure is growing to stop U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition fighting against Iran-backed rebels there.
The Saudi-led coalition has reportedly suspended its assault on the key port city of Hodeidah, and that's where up to 80% of Yemen's food comes through. But the rebels have denied reports of a ceasefire. Civilians are caught in the middle of this conflict, and experts warn that 14 million people in Yemen are on the brink of famine.
We are doing all what we can to escape death because price has gone up everything. And I pray to God to stop this war and for people to go back to how they were. The prices of products doubled once and twice, and we go around looking for gas and oil and medicine and everything else. We can't find anything.
Tal, has been so bad in Yemen. I think we all sort of we grasp at this report that maybe the fighting in Hodeidah will stop for a while and the port city will reopen and more aid can come through. But man, what a tough situation.
Very tough situation. Democrats and a few Republican lawmakers have been trying, not for the first time, to stop the entire U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition, not only refueling of the aircrafts, as the Trump administration stopped a week ago, but, you know, that could change maybe when Democrats take the House in January, because now it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, the Saudis aren't changing much.
Coming up, we'll go to Florida for a live report on the dramatic election recount in that state. At least one county missed the 3 p.m. deadline. So what happens to all those votes now?